Yo, this is DJ Jazzy Jeff, and you are checking out Ambrosia for Heads.
Ah, wow. The first album that I've ever bought with my own money would probably be, wow, that's really going back. It would probably be a mass production album. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of the album. I don't necessarily remember the name of the album, but it was the album that had I Just Want to Make My Dreams Come True. That was a really big block party song in Philly. Well, that was one of those songs that, I used to go to the block parties and I would sit and just watch the DJ, just kind of control everything. Like he played the music and it was almost like people did whatever he made them do, through records. And that was one of the records that he would play and everybody would go crazy. So I just kind of took my lunch money one day and was like, I'm just not gonna eat. I'm gonna jump on the sub and I'm gonna go downtown and I'm gonna buy this record and that's gonna kick it off. Wow, I don't think I know the words to anything. I used to really focus a lot on the music. And I would kind of listen to the words, more so in cadence with the music. Like the words were almost, especially with hip hop, the words were a part of the drum beat. They were part of the rhythm, that, with the cadence, it was kind of like you got the hi-hat, you got the kick, you got the snare, and you got the words, and it all kind of played together. And that's, for the most part, was the only way that I could remember some of the words. First favorite rapper would probably, wow, that's a good one. Probably Curtis Blow. I think, I remember, in the early days of hip hop, of course everybody loved, the all of the old records, and I remember before hip hop kind of came out, we were listening to R&B, funk, that's what made me buy the Mass Production album. So when Rapper's Delight came on, every morning getting on the bus going to school, it was a period that it seemed like every week there was 2 or 3 new records that came out. Treacherous 3 with At the Party and Body Rock, and and the Funky 4 plus one more with Rapping and Rock in the House. It was just records after records. But I think Curtis Blow, when he came out with Christmas Rapping, that was one of the first records that to me had a theme, and it was a specific theme. And if you remember Christmas Rapping, there were 2 parts to it. The first part was all about Christmas, and the second part was just a party rap. And, it was just kind of like one of those things that, it comes on at the party and everybody runs to try to find a girl to dance to because you want to dance for the whole 8-9 minutes, of the song. And you want to show the girl that you know all of the words to the song when you're dancing with her. So I think Curtis Blow definitely kind of moved to the front of the list on that. I was DJing before, like I said, before the hip hop records kind of came out. I remember us, especially being in Philly, I remember getting New York tapes, that someone would have a tape of Harlem World or someone would have a tape of T Connection, and it would be a 19th generation tape that was sounded muffled. You could barely even hear what they were saying, but you almost kind of closed your eyes and envisioned what that party scene was like. I remember going to a block party and somebody advertised that we have the Fearless 4 MCs coming down, and they actually set up 4 microphones on the pavement, and it was hundreds of people just standing around because it was kind of like, we don't really know what this is. We only hear. We never get a chance to see it, and this is our first chance to see it. And of course, nobody ever showed up. But I remember going to a concert in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Arena, and Jimmy Spicer was there. Curtis Blow was there, and it was funny because Jimmy Spicer actually had a girl DJing for him, and Curtis Blow had Run DMC DJing for him. So, it was just, and that was, it was big. It's 10, 15,000 people there, and, before that, I had never been to a show. I think me saying this right now is the first time my mom's going to realize that I snuck out and went to that show. But, you know, it was something that you just had to see firsthand, you know, because, you know, back then, this was the first time that somebody made some music for me. You know, I loved all of the funk and soul records, but that was pretty much my mom and my brothers that I just kind of picked up. You know, hip hop was mine. So I was like, I need to go see and figure out whatever I can figure out how this whole thing works. You know, just being a DJ, I've always been in love with music and playing music. And like I said, I love the power that a DJ had to make people happy. So when hip hop came out, it was kind of like, wow, you're going to give me all these records that my brother left me, you know, from James Brown to Sly Stone. And now I got Curtis Blow, Run DMC. I got, you know, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. You know, I got these records too. You know, it was a no-brainer. You know, it was a no-brainer. You know, I think on every block in Philadelphia, somebody DJ'd and somebody rapped. You know, it was just that's what you did. You do the house party on your block, and everybody loves it. You know, and everybody in the 3-block radius know that you're the DJ, and you do the house party in the block. And you almost have to give credit to the person who convinced their mind to let them throw the house party. You know, because they would throw it the next week and then more people would come, and they'd throw it the next week and next, you know, now you got 5-6 block radius, and then somebody 5-6 blocks away says, hey, can you do my party? And you would kind of go and do their party. And it's almost like a disease that you start from 3 blocks to 10 blocks to 20 blocks, and it just goes to, okay, Jeff is kind of the man in this section in West Philadelphia. Now somebody, you know, asked me to do something in Southwest Philly. So you did that, and people are like, oh my God, you know, Jeff is great. And then you move to Southwest Philly, and then next thing you know, you meet the DJ in South Philly, and he asks you to come down and do a guest set, and now you got fans in South. So it just keeps going and going. You know, there were people who were just the kings of their neighborhood, and it just grew to, you know, okay, I kind of got my neighborhood, and I kind of got his neighborhood and this neighborhood, and then I got all of West Philly, and now I got West Philly and South Philly, and now, you know, I did something that the guy brought all of the big DJs from in the city to one place, and now I got fans all over the city, and then somebody booked me in Jersey. So now I done crossed the bridge, you know, I'm like, oh man, I done went down to Delaware, and it just starts and starts, you know, and the crazy thing is that's where it dies for most people. You know, and just so happened, you know, Will and I, you know, went in the basement, and I played Moments in Love, and he did he wrote Girls Ain't Nothing But Trouble to Moments in Love. And we used to go to parties, and he would perform it. And I used to sit and watch 350 people stand there and hang on every word he said. You know, like, it was kind of like, okay, you know this record, but he's telling this story, and you're waiting to see what is going to happen in this story. And I was kind of like, wow, this is crazy. Like, we got him, you know, and took it to a local record company. You know, he pressed up Girls Ain't Nothing But Trouble, and, you know, next thing you know, we was doing shows in New York and Baltimore, and then we went to LA, and we went to London, and, you know, so, and even after all of that, I was still kind of like, yeah, I'm going home and I'm going to work for the post office, and one day I'm going to be able to tell my son I made a record. You know, you know, Will was on his way to MIT. You know, so it was kind of like, yeah, it's cool, we made a record, but we still don't know, you know. I think you just kind of get to a point that you look up, and it's kind of like, wow, for 4 years we've been doing this, and we've been traveling around the world, and, you know, you go from making, you know, $150, $200 a week to we were getting $1,500 a show. You know, and you kind of like, wow, that's $750 for me, $750 for Will, and we did 4 shows this weekend. You know, I'm like, I got $3,000 underneath my mattress. You know, and it just kept growing and growing. You know, I was scared to open up a bank account, because I was kind of like, man, I ain't never had this much money. I ain't gonna put it somewhere where I can't touch it. What if they take it? You know. Yes and no. You know, it is to watch it grow. You know, I remember a time that, you know, there were people in the media that said hip hop was going to die. But I think it was one of those things that when I kind of looked at it, you know, like I said, hip hop was my music. You know, it was the music of the youth. And I just kept saying, as long as we have young people, we're always going to have hip hop. This is one of those things that I don't think it's ever going to die. you know, and just, you know, like I said, to watch it, you know, go from not getting any recognition on the award shows and, you know, and things like that, for it to be pretty much the most widely recognizable music in the world today. You know, that sometimes that surprises me. I always thought that it could be huge. I never thought that it would be to a point. No one ever made me believe that, you know, 29 years after I first started, that you would still be doing hip hop. You know, and not only that, like, I'm playing hip hop records for 15,000 people in Singapore. That's never saw that.